Welcome to the Dire podcast. My name is Sean, and I want to thank you for joining me here today on the first episode of what I hope to be a very long-standing podcast. There's a lot to discuss today. We're going to talk about Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, one last hurrah, discussing that game as my personal 2019 Game of the Year. We're going to discuss some games coming up in 2020 that I'm looking forward to, and we're also going to add Final Fantasy VII to the list, which I will explain what that is later in the podcast. But first, I think some introductions are in order. So this is not my first podcast. This is not my first channel. This is not my first website. I started a channel called The Gaming Resume about 2.5 years ago from the time of this recording. You may have heard of it. It's still out there today. It was a channel I started because I was a big fan of the Easy Allies, and I would watch their podcasts every week. I'd watch their videos throughout the week, and with my love of gaming, I thought, I could do that too. And so I started the Gaming Resume to talk about games and to do some produced content, to do some things outside the norm. And we started off doing some of those things. I say we. Eventually I had to, shortly after the first couple videos, bring on some folks onto the team to help me out, because I knew at the time, I thought having a solo podcast wasn't going to be as entertaining, and maybe it isn't, but time will tell. So I had the wonderful gentleman Matt Mann, Onyx Franciscini, and Rodolfo Montilla join me in the Gaming Resume, and together we did a bunch of podcasts and reactions and other fun and crazy discussions on our YouTube channel for about a year. Eventually Matt had to step out of the channel for some reasons. The biggest one ultimately was he moved to Colorado. So he departed the channel about a year into its life, and then Onyx, Rudy, and I continued on for about another year. And then come E3 2019, I realized I needed to take a step back from the Gaming Resume as well for a few different reasons. The first reason, not the prime, but one of the things I was struggling with at the time with the Gaming Resume was it had departed from what I had envisioned it at the beginning. We were starting to concentrate more on what could get us the most views, what could get us more subscribers. It wasn't... I can't say it was not my idea. It was partially my idea, though I wasn't firmly behind it. I went along with it. Whatever could get us monetization. So reaction videos and Let's Plays were kind of where we were leaning pretty heavily on, more so the reactions. It got to the point where we were recording every week, and if there was a new trailer, if there was a Nintendo Direct, if there was a conference, that took precedence over everything else. We'd push stuff out just to make sure we could do reactions, and I eventually realized that a lot of the things I wanted to talk about weren't getting talked about, and some of the things that I wanted to talk about, the other guys didn't necessarily have any background or history with. I had came up with the idea for the Classy Classics series over on that channel, which, similar to the Easy Allies, their Hall of Greats, where we talk about games that we love and we put them in a Hall of Fame sort of thing. I thought that would be a way to talk about some of the games I wanted to, but we, did that quarterly. I think we did it 2 or 3 times. It just wasn't enough for me, and with the focus on, subs and monetization, it wasn't where I wanted to go. And so Dire Docs, this is a channel that isn't going to be that. There is a Patreon account. You're welcome to go throw some support over there, but there's no tiers, there's no requirements, there's no gates, there's no ads. I'm not focused on monetization. I'm not focused on subscribers. I'm not focused on views. I'm focused on the content. And that may sound like I'm putting the other guys in a bad light. I'm not. They definitely were focused on content as well. They're continuing on with the channel, the Gaming Resume, and they're doing a great job. It just wasn't what I wanted. And there were some other more important reasons why I left the Gaming Resume. I, over the past couple years, was diagnosed with pretty extreme anxiety. I've had anxiety since probably the 6th grade, which we'll get into over time in these podcasts. But it didn't really manifest into something that was impacting my daily life until within the past couple years, mostly due to stuff at my primary job, my 9 to 5. But it was impacting some of the decisions I was making. I was thinking some thoughts that just weren't the kind of thoughts that I would think of. That just wasn't me. I was on some medication for a while that didn't work out for me so well. I saw a therapist and things just weren't working out the way I wanted to there. I backed off. My anxiety eased up a bit. I'm back on some medication now. Anyway, with the Gaming Resume, I realized there was just too much going on in my life, and that added pressure was stressing me out and causing me some anxiety. So I decided to take a step back. I needed to spend way more time with my family, which I was not doing, primarily because I was working 50 plus hours at my regular job and then coming home and doing videos and thinking up stuff to do for the Gaming Resume. So I backed off of that, and I announced that to all my friends on Facebook shortly after E3. Got a lot of support there. But when I made that announcement, I did say that I was not going to be done talking about games. This was not the end of my career. I just needed a break, and I needed to step back from the Gaming Resume. Well, 6 months have gone by. I started Dire Docs back in August, actually. August of 2019, but I kind of let it sit there for a while. I did one video for Mario 3 top 10 music tracks. Produced that. That was a lot of fun. But I still needed some time to really figure out what I wanted out of this channel, what I wanted out of myself. And I think I've got at least enough of an idea to begin developing content, which is why I have this podcast. This podcast is going to be a combination of a lot of different things that I want to talk about, a lot of different things I want to do. If you are listening to this on YouTube, the video that you're seeing is going to be whatever I happen to be playing at the time. So in a sense, it's kind of like a Let's Play, but not traditional. I'm currently working my way through Ni no Kuni on the Switch. It's a lot of fun. It's not the first time I played it. I beat it on PlayStation 3, but decided to revisit it after a few years, and it is hard. Believe it or not. But we're not here to talk about that. Let's move on. Let's get into the content we're here to discuss, starting with another game that's actually really hard, Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. This is my 2019 game of the year. I didn't play too many games this year. There were a lot of games I missed that probably would have been contenders. I'm not sure any of them would have beaten Sekiro. Sekiro, which I did not beat, I got pretty close to the end, but I did not beat it, was definitely the best experience I had this year. The challenge and difficulty was there, like in previous Souls games. This one, Soulsborne games, this one was a bit different in that it really made you concentrate on skill, especially with your weapon. Skill as far as blocking and parrying and counterattacks. Some I've seen compare it to a fighting game, that you have to be very precise with the moves that you're making in order to succeed. And in many ways, that's correct. It's a tough game. There are certain times you can cheese enemies. There's times where you eventually become overpowered enough to where you don't have to be super good at the combat, although by the time you get strong enough, you're going to be good. But some of those bosses, if you have not figured out the combat system, you're not going to do well. And that was a struggle for a lot of people. With Bloodborne or Dark Souls, you can grind out experience, you can grind out souls, and turn them in and upgrade your stats and, bolster your defense, bolster your health, bolster your attack, and eventually overcome the challenge before you in those games by, brute strength, by your stats. Well, you can't do that in Sekiro. In Sekiro, your stats only grow when you defeat bosses. So in order to grow your stats strong enough to beat the bosses, you just have to get good. There are multiple branching paths in the game, so if you are struggling with a particular boss, you can go fight other bosses and hopefully get enough to increase your stats so that it makes it a little bit easier. But generally speaking, you just have to get good. You can't rely on stats to get you through the game. I got up until the point in the game where you have to make a decision to stand by a particular person or go against their wishes, and I chose to go against their wishes. I won the battle that followed. Man, was that tough. Definitely the toughest thing in the game I had experienced, and that's pretty much where I ended. So I'm at the point where I can go for one of a few different endings, but I just did not continue on. But not for lack of trying. There were just other things coming out at the time, and I haven't revisited it yet. But the combat, I just want to come back to that real quick. The response, the feeling, the immersion factor is so good in this game that it rivals most other games. I honestly can't think of too many games outside of maybe, really tight first-person shooters where the response, the player feedback is so fluid and precise. I mean, when you block, you are blocking. When you attack, you are attacking. You feel every swing, you feel every hit that you take. Which I can't say the same for some of the other Souls games, not to say they were imprecise, but Sekiro definitely stands out in that regard. I think, comparing it to some of the other games, I'm not sure it eclipses the greatness of Bloodborne. Bloodborne holds a special place in my heart, as that was the first Soulsborne game that really clicked for me. I'd played Demon Souls, I got decently far into it, but eventually gave up. Dark Souls I didn't like, and I still haven't played it all that much. But Bloodborne clicked for me, got the Platinum Trophy there. Such an amazing game. Dark Souls 3 I beat. Sekiro was reaching the heights of Bloodborne. It just never quite got over that hump for me. And I think part of that was the more grounded setting that it was in. I mean, there's definitely fantasy and supernatural elements to Sekiro. But being in that era of Japan gave it a certain feeling of, happening in the real world that when I play games, I like to be a little bit more on the fantasy side. That's just a personal preference. That's not a knock against the game at all. So for that reason, something like Bloodborne, in my mind, is better. But Sekiro had pretty much everything that Bloodborne had that I liked. It had all the different level design that took you in different different ways, different paths. It was always a puzzle trying to figure out how the levels were going to either come to a dead end or bring you back to a place that you've started. And that traversal, that adventure, that exploration From Software does so well, and they nailed it again in Sekiro. I think there was a moment in the game where there were 6 different directions I could have gone, and it was overwhelming, but in a good way. So I'm glad that was still in the game. I think the plot of the game, while interesting, was I don't want to say the weakest part of the game, because it wasn't weak, but it was probably my less favorite part of the game. I think if I had taken the time to really understand it a little bit more, it would have been a lot better. I think the voice acting, I think the way that the characters spoke, I think the music that played during cutscenes, I think the amount of cutscenes, all of that was fantastic. I really got into it, and I really appreciated the themes of life and death and rebirth, and loyalty. I think were some of the main themes of the game that I really enjoyed. I just never really got into the back end plot, some of the world building as much as, say, Bloodborne. But it was still a lot of fun, and no other game came close to that kind of experience for me this year. There's a certain boss that you fight early on in the game, I'd say, maybe the 3rd boss, technically. You fight on top of one of the buildings in this open area, and I can't remember his name, but that was really where the game clicked for me. It was like when you learn how to block and break through their guard and get them, it was just an unreal feeling. It was so difficult, but once you overcome it and you realize the skill that you've gained as a result, it just felt so good. And so many games come and go that don't give me that feeling. Sekiro did. It also gave me a lot of frustration. Lady Butterfly was just the worst. The headless ape, I cheesed that boss. That boss was a struggle. Just run in, 2 quick hits and run away. It took almost an hour to beat that stupid thing. And then the boss where I declined to follow and we did battle, that was nuts. I didn't do the second version of that battle. I only did the first, but yeah, very challenging game indeed. There's some other games from 2019 I haven't played that I would like to play that theoretically could become my new 2019 game of the year. The Outer Worlds is something I really want to look into, but for now, Sekiro takes the honors. We'll see if it ever makes the list, which we will talk about in a little while. For now, let's talk about 2020 most anticipated games. I've got a list of 7 games here I want to discuss. These are all games that are coming to current consoles. I'm not going to discuss anything that may or may not come to the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series X, such as Halo Infinite or the Hellblade 2 trailers that were shown. Those look fantastic. I'm not going to talk about those now because I want to see more before I get hyped. So this isn't a next-gen discussion. We're still going to concentrate on games coming out in the current gen. However, I think some of these are going to have next-gen equivalents or will at least run better on the newer hardware. These are loosely in order of what I'm anticipating most. I wouldn't say that they're in a hard order. My feelings change from day to day. We'll start with Ori and the Will of the Wisps. I just beat Ori and the Blind Forest for the first time a few weeks ago. I got it on the Switch, and I played through it. I'm pretty sure I got to 100%. I had a great time. It wasn't the best Metroidvania game I've played. I'm very much looking forward to Silksong, which is not on this list. I don't think it's 2020. But Ori and the Will of the Wisps is confirmed to be coming out this year. It is a game that was revealed early on in the Gaming Resume's life, so been watching it for a while. I'm glad to have finally played Blind Forest, and I'm looking forward to this game. I don't think I'm going to run out and get it at launch, but the first game, the music was so good. The story was surprisingly touching. And then the exploration mechanics, I really enjoyed. I had a lot of fun running back and forth, accessing new areas as I got new abilities. I didn't like the amount of footwork that had to be done, but maybe that can be improved in Ori and the Blind Forest. Ori and the Will of the Wisps. So yeah, not too much more to say about that. I'm glad it's finally coming out, and I'm looking forward to it. Next up is Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm a little hesitant about this game. I have a feeling it's not going to be as good as what everybody hopes it will be. I think it's going to be slightly disappointing. I don't know why. I can't put my finger on why. It's just a hunch. But we'll see. Animal Crossing, I picked that up on GameCube when the franchise first started, and this was before Facebook. This was probably during the MySpace period. It was essentially offline social media. You know, working with the different folks in the town, seeing how their days are going, maybe doing a little errand for them and getting something in return. Just going fishing, chopping down trees, planting flowers. It was a lot of fun, and some of the later games have continued to get better. The version, I believe it's called New Leaf, that's on the DS or the 3DS, was a lot of fun. It was really good. I put dozens of hours into that game. And I like what Nintendo has shown so far for New Horizons. It seems like they are giving us more tools, more things that we can do that are quality of life that we've asked for in the past for Animal Crossing games. But there's just something off about these trailers, and I think part of it was the game was delayed. I think it was supposed to come out in 2019. It was delayed into early 2020, and we still haven't seen a whole lot of it. I think at the next Nintendo Direct, which hasn't been announced, but I would assume there'll be one in January or February, we'll get some more info and some better video for the game, but I don't know. I just don't think the magic is there in what they've shown. I'd love to be proven wrong, and I'm definitely excited to get the game, but I think it might, I really hope it doesn't turn out like Pokemon Sword and Shield, where the hype was way more than what the game actually turned out to be. But we shall see. Next up, number 5 on the list, counting down from 7 to 1. Number 5, Cyberpunk 2077. You know, I think I know a lot of people are looking forward to this game. This game's probably got Game of the Year written all over it. I think these kinds of games, while they are exciting and on paper they should be really enjoyable, I really didn't enjoy The Witcher all that much, which I know is not a majority opinion. The Witcher 3, I just couldn't get into it. I was more into the exploration, I guess. I was playing it more like a Skyrim game and less like an RPG with a story. So while I was paying attention to the story elements, I wasn't invested in them, and I ended up not getting very far. I think, in the story, I should say. I got decently far into the game. I enjoyed the crafting system. I enjoyed the cooking. I enjoyed the exploration. I enjoyed the Gwent card game. And while The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk are going to play completely different, I have to look at Cyberpunk through the lens of what CD Projekt Red did with The Witcher 3, and I don't know. The game absolutely looks impressive. It looks like a ton of content. I just don't know if it's for me. But because of the caliber of the company, I know it's going to be polished. I know that it's mechanically going to be great. I'm just not sure it's up my alley. Again, waiting and seeing. I think a lot of 2020, which I'm probably just going to end up repeating for all these games, is I'm waiting to see. I don't want to say I'm cynical. I'm just skeptical. I've been burned a lot on games, and I'm just not sure where these last hurrahs before the next generation of consoles comes out. I just don't know where these games are, if they're going to have the polish that they need, or if they're just going to be quick cash-ins to monopolize on the end of the generation. I do think Cyberpunk is a game I'm going to wait on. I think because I have a base OG PS4, and I think I'd rather wait and play it on the PS5. I think that's the game, and Final Fantasy VII Remake are the games that are going to make me wait a bit. Because running those on PS4, they're probably not going to perform all that well. Number 4 on the list, The Last of Us Part 2. You know, I didn't beat The Last of Us. I ended up needing to watch YouTube videos to finish it off. This was another game where I was actually really invested in the story. I was not into the gameplay. I like stealth games. I did not like how this game operated. It just wasn't for me. But from the get-go, from that opening scene where you play as the daughter up through the end of that segment, it just grabs you. And getting out of the city, that whole scenario was just fantastic. I loved it. Then I got out into the world and I just didn't care as much anymore. I think the two characters definitely had chemistry. It was the game itself that the strongest points were the characters, specifically Joel and Ellie, and that's why I was okay just watching most of the rest of it on YouTube. I think I got as far as the sewers when you're with I think it was two brothers or a father and a son. I can't remember. I got into that area and then I had to stop. But The Last of Us 2, the video that they've shown, again, it hooks you. The story hooks you. What they've shown with Ellie, both in the reveal trailer where she massacred everybody, and then in the E3 trailer from 2018, where she's going after the folks. It just looks so good. And I hope that the gameplay is a little bit more actiony. What they showed definitely had more action in it than what I recall from The Last of Us. So maybe some of my gripes are going to be taken care of. I don't know if I'm going to wait and play that on PS5 or if I'm just going to bite the bullet and play it on PS4. But it's not a game I'm rushing out to play, but I think of all the games listed so far, it's the one so far that I'd be interested in playing. Oh man, I'm totally shaking off the rust. It's been 6 months. Forgive me, working through this podcast. Number 3, this game I'm now we're getting into the games I'm excited for. Doom Eternal. The first, in quotes, air quotes, first Doom was a surprise for many. I think the story there was the reviews weren't so great. The game came out. Or no, I'm sorry. It didn't. The review copies didn't come out until the day before or the day of release. So that made everybody assume the game was going to be terrible. But it turns out the game was fantastic. Doom was a surprise, and because of how surprising it was, and just the quality of the game, that's why I'm excited for Doom Eternal. When a game design company can step up and deliver something that exceeds your expectations, that blows you away, I'm going to listen again, and I'm definitely going to listen with Doom Eternal. Doom has never really been a franchise I've been into. I don't even remember why I picked it up. I think I got it cheap, like on Prime Day or something that year. But man, the traversal, the different guns, just the speed, and at first I didn't think I was going to be able to keep up, but you end up keeping up, and it's just so frantic and fun and flashy. It's an F game. I can't wait for Doom Eternal. I've tried not to watch too much footage, although, I mean, I don't want to say it looks more of the same. It looks more improved. I like that it's going to take place on Earth. So from a story perspective, I'm interested to see what they do with it. And knowing all of the exploration and different abilities and things that you could do in the first game, seeing those come in the second game, I'm looking forward to it. I'm not as big into the multiplayer as I was, or as I have been for other games with Doom, and I probably won't be with Doom Eternal, but that's okay. It's more about the campaign for me. Number 2, Ghost of Tsushima. I really hope this game works out, and I think it will. What they showed in the reveal was so artistic. I love how they took their time. It was a very patient reveal, with the main character coming out of the forest as the storm's rolling in, right after a massacre. He's looking over a field. And the music is playing. It's all just very calm and quiet despite what's going on. And they take it slow. He rides down across the field. He goes into the forest. Some people are running away. I think from the Mongolians. He starts walking in. He confronts his first set, and it was like straight out of a movie where he grabs his sword or katana or whatever it is, and he's about to do a duel with one of the other guys, and all of a sudden all these leaves blow by. It feels like the camera slowly zooms in a bit. It feels like time has slowed down, and then he strikes and kills the guy. And it's like, wow, that looked like something right out of a movie. It was so artistic, and there was a lot of attention to detail that leads me to believe this game is going to be a rich experience. The rest of that reveal, there's some stealth elements, typical climb on top, jump down, kill some bad guys, ending with another duel with one of the other characters, as rains of arrows start coming in, and that fight eventually morphs into something different. I mean, the trailer ended right there. It just had a lot of heart. It had a lot of passion. You could tell the team behind it put so much effort into just that little vertical slice that it gives me hope. Now, vertical slices can also be misleading. So again, I don't want to be cynical. I'm gonna be cautiously optimistic that Ghost of Tsushima is going to be one of the best games in 2020. I think I might bite the bullet and play it on PS4, although I'll wait and see if the reviews say performance isn't great, because I feel like all these companies now, they're ready for this next gen, and they don't want to have to hold back. And I think a lot of games that are coming out now are at least being optimized primarily for, like the PS4 Pro. And with my OG PS4, I don't know if I want to be playing these games now. I made it through God of War though, so that worked out. All right, and last but not least, and I don't know why I put this as the number 1 game on this list, but I did. Final Fantasy VII Remake. And we'll get into Final Fantasy VII shortly in the list, but I don't think the remake is going to hit the same highs as the original game. For me, personally, I think there's a lot of personal history and nostalgia with the first game that they're just not going to be able to replicate. And in the reveal trailer, they said, whatever the narration, it was a bit meta. It was like, whatever this becomes, let's just embrace whatever it is. And so I get it. They said up front, look, we're not going to be able to match the feeling of the first time you played this game, though I think they're going to try. some of these trailers, I don't know. At times it's like, oh my gosh, you're pulling my heartstrings, and at other times it's like, wait, why did you decide to put that in there? With this game, this first part of the remake, this is just a part. This is the first part. It's just Midgar. I don't know. I mean, apparently it's coming on 2 Blu-ray discs. The only other game to do that other than Red Dead Redemption 2, so I'm to understand. It's going to be massive, or at least there's going to be a lot of art assets in the game. I just don't know. I think the Midgar story does have a beginning, middle, and end. I think they can tell a compelling story there, but stretching that out for 40 to 60 hours, which it probably won't be 60, I guess 40, they're going to have to add stuff, and that's where they have to be real careful, because now they're changing things about the original game that may be things people don't want. And I don't know what to expect. When I saw some of the ghosts flying around Cloud and Aeris, I'm like, what is this? And maybe out of context, I'm not remembering something from the game, although I just replayed it on the Switch. But there's moments in there that until I see the context, I'm questioning how good this game's going to be. Apparently there's a demo on PSN that's going to be coming out soon. There's already a video leak of the intro to the demo. I have not watched it. I don't care to watch it. I will play the demo if it becomes available, but I'd say I'm more intrigued than anything. I'm not in a rush to play this game. I may wait and get it on PS5 for performance reasons. It's Final Fantasy VII. It's not like there's anything new there that I'm not going to have already experienced beyond just the new level of immersion that a remake's going to bring over the game developed back in 1997. 22 years ago. That's unreal. So yeah, I put it at the top of the list, but again, I think there's other games on this list that I will probably purchase first. But I really do want to see where it goes, because Final Fantasy VII is a game that is near and dear to my heart for a few reasons. We'll get into that in a minute. Before we do, I want to take a little break. I want to take a little breather. I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that anxiety is one of the reasons why I stepped away from the gaming resume. It's one of the reasons why I made this channel, Dire Docs. I want to, at times, bring some spotlight to anxiety and some focus to it. And for those of you who are out there who suffer from anxiety or stress, and who have made it this far in the podcast, I want to give you a little reprieve. I want to give you a couple minutes to just meditate and reflect on some of the things that I've discussed with you so far. So we're going to do that, and I've got some very special music to play during this quick interlude. Here we go. Welcome back. That was Vigil from the first Mass Effect. I hope you were able to meditate, clear your thoughts, relax a little bit in the middle of this podcast. But get ready, because now we are moving on to Final Fantasy VII and the list. So the list is something that I wanted to do from day one, way back in August with Dire Dire Docs. This is a list of every game I have ever played ranked. And I started pulling games together by year. And I started with everything that came out prior to 1985 to make that easy. And I had this vision of going year by year, essentially, pre-1985, 1985, 1986, 87, and so on, and do a video for each one. And I realized that was going to be a lot of work. There was a lot of writing that I would have to do, a lot of video capture, it's just a lot of work to talk about those games. And I said, you know what? There's got to be another way to do this. And so this is one of the main segments of this podcast. This segment will be in all of the podcasts as long as as long as I feel like it, which I don't see why I wouldn't. Where I'm going to talk about a game. There may be podcasts where we do multiple games, but where I talk about a game and add it to the list. And we're going to celebrate Final Fantasy VII. In this case, there may be some games we don't celebrate that get added to the list, but then we're going to rank it. And eventually, my goal is to have a list of every game I've ever played ranked. So we're going to start with Final Fantasy VII. You'll be able to see this and other games in the list on the website, dirediredocs.com, so please go check that out. But let's get into this. Final Fantasy VII. I'm not going to be giving these games, as part of the list, any sort of review score. That's not what this is, because this list is entirely subjective. So I'm not going to be super objective with it. Starting with Final Fantasy VII, so it's entering the list at number 1. I can tell you right off the bat, it will not stay there forever. I'm not sure when it will get moved down. Maybe in the next episode. We shall see. I guess it depends on what the next game in the list will be. But enough of that. All right. Final Fantasy VII. Whew. Okay, so my history with this game, I'd like to think, is pretty unique compared to other people. Final Fantasy, the first game, was a game I got into on the Nintendo in 3rd grade, 4th grade, somewhere around there. And it was mind-blowing. I had a friend at school who was telling me about it. He was telling me about magic and mages and goblins, and I'm like, man, what a nerd. This game sounds stupid. And then I was over at his house one day, and he was showing it to me. I'm like, okay. But then it clicked while I was watching him, and, we took turns playing. Like, I would get to play the Black Mage, and he'd play the other characters in the party or whatever. And I was like, oh, it clicked. What he was trying to describe to me, he just hadn't done very well. And I was like, wow, this is cool. And he pulled out the bestiary for the game, and you could see all the enemies and how much experience they were worth and the health and what items they could drop and stuff like that. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. So I got Final Fantasy for my own on Nintendo, and I beat it probably multiple times. One of the best games on the original NES, bar none. I'm sure that game will make the list someday. But after that, I didn't play any other Final Fantasy games. In fact, I wasn't aware there were any other Final Fantasy games, due in part to 3 of the next 5 games not coming out in America until much later. America only got Final Fantasies 1, 4, and 6. 4 and 6 both being on the Super Nintendo, which I never had as a kid, so I didn't know Final Fantasy continued past that first game. Until 1997. Christmas 97, I was really excited to get my Nintendo 64 for Christmas. My parents had gotten rid of all our gaming consoles a few years prior, but eventually my brother and I convinced them that it was time to let us have games again. So I was like, come on, N64, we've got Super Mario and GoldenEye, come on. and Santa brought us a PlayStation. And I remember looking at my dad thinking, what? Really? What is this? I had no idea what was on the PlayStation. And I think the games we got were like NFL Game Day 98, Jet Moto, which was a fun game, and a Star Wars fighting game that wasn't very good. And so, after a few days playing that, I'm like, I've got some money. Can we go to Toys R Us? I need to buy another game. So we go to Toys R Us. By the way, this is back before not before the internet, but before we had internet access, or there was really a whole lot of content. You wouldn't think to look up this stuff on the internet. Anyway, went to Toys R Us, and I just remember looking at this wall of games, a wall of games for the PS1, and I did not know any of these franchises. I didn't know what was good or what was bad. I felt like I was at Blockbuster, another old school, now defunct company. Jeez, I'm showing my age. Or Final Fantasy VII is, or both. And I'm like, gee, I don't know what to pick. I don't know what's going to be good or bad. And at some point, my eyes caught the front of the box for Final Fantasy VII. It was just this guy holding this big sword. And I'm like, okay, is this like a fighting game? But I remember looking at the box, and I'm actually looking at the box right now. I'm actually holding the greatest hits version. I'm not holding the original version anymore. I don't know if the back of the box is the same. But I remember looking at it thinking, what kind of game is this? I mean, there's a lot of cool graphics on here. Wow, this looks really cool. An epic adventure. Lush 3D animation environments and stuff. And, I bought into all of the stuff that they quote on the back of the box. But there's no screenshots here, so I didn't know what kind of game this actually was. And, but I'm looking at the words Final Fantasy, and it was ringing a bell. I honestly, because my parents had gotten rid of our consoles, I couldn't remember the name of the game from the NES days. It had been a few years since I'd played it. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, Final Fantasy, is this the same game I played? On the way home in the car, when I busted open the booklet and I started flipping through the pages and I saw some of the battle menus or battle screenshots, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is Final Fantasy. What sold me on the game was the 7 in the title, of all things. I thought, well, if they're on the 7th game in this franchise, it can't be all that bad. Plus the box art looked real cool. So I ended up getting Final Fantasy VII. I brought it home and just utterly blown away. I did not know what to expect. No word of mouth, no commercials, no nothing. I literally bought it on a whim, and it well, I don't want to say it changed my life. I don't want to get that hyperbolic, but it had a significant impact on my life, I guess, for a few different reasons. At the time, I had been struggling with my peer groups, my social groups. In 5th grade, I swapped schools. I ended up going to a private school for my middle school years, and I wasn't treated very well. A lot of the kids there were snobs, and I had friends, but it wasn't the same. They had all grown up together. I was sort of the outcast, and Final Fantasy VII had similar themes. Cloud was an outcast from Soldier, although you later find out a bunch of other stuff about him. There was just a lot there. Even in the opening sequence when, him and Barrett are getting into it, and, Barrett's this, in the game, he's this dude that towers above everybody else. You can tell he's this big muscular guy. And Cloud, well, I guess he was muscular. When you look at their polygonal characters, definitely not like Barrett. And there's a point where he goes right up to Barrett and stands on his toes and gets right in his face. And he's like, I want to talk about my money. And it's like, dang, this guy's a badass. And so, I really appreciated how there were characters, there were outcasts in this game that were able to stand up to, not bullies, I guess, but just people that didn't accept them. So that was the hook that got me. What I didn't know at the time was I had started to suffer from anxiety. Not like I do today, but still did at the time. A lot of social anxiety as a result of how some of the kids treated me in middle school. And a lot of what Final Fantasy VII deals with is I don't want to say mental illness, because it technically is not. Cloud, he's experimented on. He's got Genova cells in him. He's got Zack's memories confused with his own. There's a lot of stuff going on in his mind that's not an illness per se, not in the real world sense. But there's a scene in the game that really hit me again on a recent playthrough. It's the scene where Cloud and Tifa both get thrown into the life stream when Mideel gets destroyed, and you end up back in Nibelheim in Cloud's mind, and you have to help him piece together what is true and what isn't. And all the while you've got Cloud, like a ghost version of Cloud, like up in the sky, like on his knees, grabbing his head and like just struggling and flailing. And it was a really cool way to visualize mental stress, and it really struck a chord with me. I really appreciated Tifa as a character, even more so after rewatching that scene again. And she was the person that I didn't really have. I didn't have for a long time. I didn't really have until I got married. That was there to help Cloud through it. And for a game to talk about those kinds of things and have it resonate, that's real special. You do not get that very often in games, or at least I haven't. And so, that scene definitely elevated Final Fantasy VII for me. I didn't realize that at the time. That's more of a more recent thing. But Final Fantasy VII back then was hitting things that subliminally I didn't even realize it was hitting. Talked about some of the characters already. I really liked Red 13. I had him in my party the whole way through the first time, just because he was a talking dog or whatever it was he was. It's interesting that he's the only one that you see in the game beyond his father, who's turned to stone, and then I guess his kids in the end game sequence, or in the credit sequence. But it's like, where's all the other Red 13s, or Nanaki, or whatever his race is? Like, where are the rest of them? I want to know more about that, and the game never really discusses that again, at least not that I recall. Let's see, are there any other characters I really want to point out here? I like the Turks. I like how they are both serious and slimy. I mean, they helped kill all those people in Sector 7, but at the same time, they're comedic and, there for comic relief. They're challenging, though, if you're not ready for them in battle. It's funny, if you think about even the characters Cloud, Barret, and Tifa. I mean, they're terrorists. They're eco-terrorists. They destroyed some reactors, which in the game they tell you, like, there's people that are homeless, there's people that have died as a result. And while Shinra definitely elevated that in order to put the smear on them, they were murderers, and you play as them as the main characters, and ultimately they save the planet. But it's interesting to think about it from that perspective. You think about these characters as being pretty heroic, and Sephiroth's the villain, but at the end of the day, they're all villains. And I think, Shinra, Sephiroth, and, even Cloud, Barret, and Tifa, in many ways, they are villains. And I think that's why Final Fantasy VII originally ends with a 500 years later video showing Nanaki still alive with his kids. Midgar's been totally overgrown by nature, and there's no humans in sight. I think that had a real... So spoilers for the end, I guess. That had a real powerful message there that humanity is just straight up evil. They suck. Not to say there's not hope. There absolutely are good people in this world, but in the confines of Final Fantasy VII, almost all the main characters were villains. Even Yuffie, she's out there stealing stuff. Granted, that's not worth killing off humanity for. Kate Sith was a traitor. Cid is an absolute dick to Shira. Let's see, who am I missing? Vincent used to be a Turk. He did some stuff he wasn't proud of in his past. There's very few people other than Eris who are presented in a way where they are pure. Like they're not bad in any sense. And she was the one that, she's the one that died. And I think that, again, was also symbolic. Anyway. Let's see. What else do I want to talk about here? The plot of the game, you really have to dig into it to appreciate it. I think at a top level, it's, fight back against a corporation. Now you got this evil villain with a doomsday scenario, going to destroy the world, take it over, whatever. But I think there's more to it. There's a lot of story bits there related to, who your true parentage is, who you truly are as a person. They talk a lot about human experimentation, which is the catalyst for what happens in the game. But I think if you really listen to some of the words that the characters are saying and you go do some of the side quest stuff, there's a decent amount of good content there that can really make you think. I guess speaking of side quest stuff, I loved the exploration in this game. When you step out of Midgar for the first time, again, not knowing what this game was about. I beat Midgar, and you're standing there, and then all of a sudden you exit out into this massive open world, and I'm like, are you saying that there's other areas like Midgar in this game? There weren't, not to the size of Midgar, but there were other cities and other places to go to, and it's like, how big and massive is this game? 60, 70 hours, maybe 80 on my first playthrough. That's how big it was. It was huge, and I think by today's standards, the exploration there is not bad, but it's not something that you'd want to see just that in new games. You want a little bit more, but for the time, man, that was unreal, stepping out and seeing how big the game actually was. The materia system kept things so fresh. There was, I think a lot of games 20 years later have done better than Final Fantasy VII, but at the time, the materia system, the customization it gave you with your characters, the sense of there's a new materia that I don't know what I'm going to get that could show up anywhere, because the game is constantly even into the end game, even into the Northern Crater, the game is still throwing brand new materia at you constantly. So it's always that piñata effect, right? You're always going to get something new as you progress through the game. And especially that first time through, not knowing what's coming it was just great. It was just fantastic. The music in this game, I really want to do a set list video for the music in this game. It is fantastic. Iconic. Many of the tracks are iconic. I think, Nobuo Uematsu had done plenty of great work prior to Final Fantasy VII, but I think it was Final Fantasy VII where he hit a whole new tier, and that continued on with 8, continued on with his other works. 7 is just it's one of the greatest soundtracks of all time, and it fit the mood, it fit the areas of the game that the tracks are played in. It's perfect. It's dark, it's gloomy. There's definitely happy moments in there, but everything about Midgar. There were industrial sounding tracks. Like there's tracks that deal with anxiety, like that scene where Tifa and Cloud are in the live stream. There's an anxious, I think it's called Anxious Heart, actually. A version of the main theme that plays, and it's just so good. And I can't talk about music very well on just a podcast, but the visuals at the time, I think it was called full motion video, FMV, the cinematics essentially. Wow, those were breathtaking back then. I'm very much looking forward to seeing the visuals of the remake. But back then, I remember saying, that's what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be, designing and developing games that are going to look like this. And while I never actually ended up doing something like that, I am in game design now. So in non-entertainment industry. So in many ways, this game pushed me to what I'm doing today as my career. We touched on the death scene a bit, the infamous, the scene, the famous scene, Aeris's death scene. That was a shock. It wasn't the first game to have done something like that, but it was the first game I'd experienced that had done something like that. I think, especially on my recent replaythrough, I had totally forgotten. There's a scene just prior to that in, is it the Temple of the Ancients? After it shrinks down and becomes the Black Materia, where Cloud jumps down in the pit and just starts beating the crap out of Aeris because Sephiroth's controlling him, or Genova's cells are controlling him. And it's like, dang, that is so intense. Like, I'm curious to see how they're going to handle that in the remake, should they ever get that far. Because even in the small polygon count that Final Fantasy VII had, it took me by surprise. Like, I'd forgotten that was a thing that happened in this game, and it's like, oh my god. The execution of it was a little weird. There's some dialogue problems with this game. The translation wasn't the greatest. I think Kate Sith walks up and he's like, well, I see this is a bad time, I'm just gonna go, or something like that. It's a little bizarre, but yeah, I'm curious to see how they handle that scene. The death scene, though, getting back to that, looking forward to seeing that, although I feel like the remake's not going to show us anything too different. I mean, we've seen that there's an FMV in the game for it. I'm pretty sure we saw pieces of her death scene in Advent Children, if I'm remembering correctly. Another favorite scene of mine is the parachute scene. I love it when teams get together and like there's this sense of courage and not triumph, but they were all in. The scene where they parachute into Midgar from the High Wind. Oh, that was so cool. I loved that. And just the animations, like one of them is like twirling in circles as they fall. The attention to detail with how they executed that, I loved it. They did something similar in Final Fantasy X during the wedding crash scene, but just something about it in Final Fantasy VII I loved, and I can't wait to see them do that in the remake too. And the summons in this game, oh man, seeing Ifrit for the first time, I'd never seen him in a game before. I didn't know what he was, and I'm like, oh god, are my parents gonna think I'm like worshiping the devil over here? Like I'm summoning up demons to defeat enemies? I was a little worried at the time what my parents were gonna think. I don't think they ever saw that in the game, but the summons in this game were so cool, and I think they eventually became a staple. In 8 you've got the Guardian forces. In 9 you eventually get I believe you pronounce her name Aiko, that can summon. In 10 Yuna's all about the summon monsters. So Final Fantasy's had a history with them. I don't know what the summons were like, if there were any, in the previous games before Final Fantasy VII. I know there weren't any in Final Fantasy 1, but in 7, I feel like they they really brought them into a place where the public, I mean, again, Final Fantasy VII blew all sorts of records, and everybody really got on the Final Fantasy train with 7. Really put them in a place where they had to continue doing them. And I think that's why you had Guardian Forces in 8 that had such a focus. Anyway, Final Fantasy VII, yeah, I think I've talked a pretty good chunk about it now. Fantastic game. It's going on the list. It's going to be number 1 for now. We'll see if it stays number 1 for much longer. I can think of one specific game that will beat it, but we're not going to talk about that game for a while. Not sure when we'll talk about it. We'll get there. But for now, Final Fantasy VII is on the list. And that concludes the first episode of the Dire podcast. There are some things that I have in mind for how to end this podcast a little bit more formally. Some fun to do, some interaction with those of you listening that will carry on between episodes. I still need to work on it a bit more. I need to flesh it out before I introduce it. And I'd like to get a little bit of a base of viewers and listeners before I implement it. Otherwise, there's not much interaction to be had. But that'll come. Definitely shook off the rust with this podcast. Oh my gosh! If you're still listening, thank you so much for making it this far. There's a lot that I want to continue doing with this channel and this podcast well into the future. I never wanted to give up the gaming resume, but it was the right thing to do. And I'm hoping that the Dire Docs is going to be what I wanted and is something that you all will enjoy. So thanks again, and looking forward to the next podcast. I'm not going to put myself on a schedule, but I am tentatively going to try and put them out twice a month, once every other week. And in between, work on some posts for the website, because with the gaming resume, I know we barely used our website for much of anything. So head on over to dirediredocs.com, where I will be doing some journalistic type posts. You will only ever see those over there. You won't get videos on them. But all our videos will get posted there as well, or at least most of them. I will probably be doing some produced content here in the future. I will also probably be doing some reaction type content. I'm going to call it sensationalist instead of the list or the set list. Sensationalist. Anyway, I think they're still fun to do. I just don't want those to be the focus, and I'm going to approach them a little differently than we did over on TGR. So if you're into that sort of thing, look forward to that as well. Otherwise, again, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful time. This is Sean Pfeil, and this has been the Dire podcast. Thank you.